Go to places where there are big fish. We know where they roam. However, there's not many of them. If there's not a lot of fish on the market and you're really willing to roll the dice on a place where there's less fish but bigger fish, that big fish can be a big score, knowing that the...
For over a decade, one name dominated the giant bluefin tuna grounds off Gloucester, Massachusetts, both on the water and on television screens across the country. Dave Carraro, captain of the FVTuna.com, five-time champion of National Geographic's Wicked Tuna, and arguably the single most successful fisherman the show ever produced. Then, after 13 seasons, the cameras simply stopped rolling on him. No farewell tour. No dramatic on-screen exit. Just silence. And that silence has fueled years of speculation about what actually happened to Dave Carraro. Was he pushed out? Did something go wrong behind the scenes? Or is the truth far less sensational than the internet wants it to be? Stick around, because by the end of this video, you'll understand exactly what happened, and why the real story might surprise you more than any rumor could. To understand Dave Carraro, you have to go back before Wicked Tuna ever existed, because the man television audiences came to know as a calculating, competitive villain was, in reality, a working fisherman who had been chasing giant bluefin tuna for years before any network came calling. Gloucester, Massachusetts isn't just a scenic backdrop for a reality show. It's one of the oldest and most storied fishing ports in the United States, a town where the ocean has shaped nearly every family's livelihood for generations. Carraro built his life there, running charters and commercial trips out of the harbor long before anyone suggested putting a camera on his boat. By the early 2010s, Carraro had already proven himself as one of the most skilled bluefin fishermen working the North Atlantic. In one especially strong season, he brought in dozens of giant tuna, several of which topped 1,000 pounds, including one fish so massive that his crew reportedly struggled just to get a rope around its tail. These weren't small hauls. Giant bluefin tuna fishing is a brutal, unpredictable trade, where a single trip can mean the difference between a profitable month and a wasted one, and Carraro had built a reputation as someone who consistently beat those odds. What's less commonly known is that fishing wasn't Carraro's only demanding profession. He also spent years working in commercial aviation, eventually earning his stripes as a captain and flight instructor. On the surface, flying planes and hunting bluefin tuna seem like completely different worlds. But talk to anyone who has done both, and you'll hear the same thing Carraro has said in interviews over the years. Both jobs demand obsessive preparation, a sharp read on constantly shifting conditions, and a healthy respect for how quickly things can go wrong. Before ever leaving the dock, Carraro was known for meticulously checking marine forecasts, weather patterns, and sea conditions, treating every trip with the same discipline he'd bring to a pre-flight checklist. It's a kind of habit you develop when you understand, on a deeply personal level, that the ocean doesn't forgive carelessness. That discipline didn't make the job any less grueling. Fishing trips could stretch well past 20 hours, with crews returning to shore utterly exhausted only to turn the boat around and head back out again after just a few hours of rest. Carraro once summed up the unpredictability of the profession in a single blunt sentence. On any given day, 1,000 things could go wrong, and only one thing could go right. That mentality, equal parts realism and grit, became the foundation of everything that followed. His boat, the FVTuna.com, wasn't just a prop for a television show. It was the center of a genuine commercial and charter fishing business. As demand grew, Carraro eventually invested in a larger, 44-foot vessel built by Calvin Beale and powered by a massive marine diesel engine capable of handling rougher water and longer trips. The upgrade wasn't about vanity, it was about capacity. His charter operation was running roughly 100 trips a year between the spring and midsummer months, and the bigger boat meant more paying customers could come along for the ride. Carraro wasn't just fishing for sport or television ratings. He was running an actual business that depended on results. He also wasn't shy about using technology to gain an edge. In one widely circulated example, satellite communications equipment helped his crew stay in contact with other boats far offshore, allowing them to coordinate and track where the fish were biting even when they were well beyond the range of normal cell service. And when it came to the fishing itself, Carraro made no secret of how competitive he was, even before reality television entered the picture. In interviews given years before Wicked Tuna existed, he openly described his mindset. If another captain landed one fish, he wanted two. If someone brought in an 800-pound tuna, he wanted to beat it with a 900-pounder. That hunger for competition wasn't manufactured for the cameras. It was already there, waiting for an audience to discover it. The path to television started, as these things often do, with a phone call. A production company had become interested in the world of giant bluefin tuna fishing and made its way to Gloucester to scout boats, crews, and captains. Carraro was one of several fishermen filmed for a pilot episode pitched to networks. When National Geographic picked up the concept, producers went back to the captains they wanted to build the show around, and Carraro was one of them. It's worth pointing out that Carraro didn't set out to become a television personality. The opportunity came to him because of the business he'd already spent years building. But once Wicked Tuna premiered in 2012, everything changed. In that very first season, Carraro's boat pulled in the wind, posting fish sales just shy of $86,000, an outcome that instantly established him as one of the show's central figures. Suddenly, a man who had spent his career quietly working the water now had an audience watching his every decision, every rivalry, and every mistake play out on national television. Carraro leaned into it, at least publicly. In an interview not long after the show took off, he offered a strikingly candid explanation for why he'd become such a polarizing figure among fans and fellow captains alike. Nobody, he said, likes a winner. The more fish he caught, the more resentment it seemed to stir up among the competition. It made for compelling television. A supremely confident captain who didn't flinch from calling himself the best and didn't seem particularly bothered by how that came across. But the most fascinating rivalry of Carraro's television career didn't start as a rivalry at all. It started as a friendship. Paul Hebert had worked as Carraro's first mate aboard the Tuna.com for years before eventually striking out on his own as captain of the Wicked Pissa. According to interviews given around the time of the split, the transition wasn't the bitter falling out that television sometimes implied. Carraro has said that he essentially encouraged Hebert to make the leap, telling him it was time to get his own boat. Hebert, for his part, agreed that becoming a captain was the right move for his career. What makes their relationship even harder to squeeze into a simple hero and villain narrative is a detail that rarely gets mentioned. When a tropical storm devastated Hebert's home in Vermont, it was Carraro who opened his own house to his former mate, letting him stay there while he got back on his feet. Years later, even after their professional rivalry had played out across multiple seasons of television, Hebert still referred to Carraro as his best friend. That doesn't erase the tension that existed between them once Hebert became a competing captain. Those rivalries were real, and the competitive fire between them was genuine. But it does complicate the idea that Wicked Tuna's conflicts were purely manufactured drama, or purely real animosity. The truth, as usual, sat somewhere in between. A similar dynamic played out with another captain, Tyler McLaughlin of the boat Pinwheel. Their on-screen rivalry became one of the show's recurring storylines for years, reaching a peak in a season built almost entirely around their renewed conflict. And yet, reporters who spent time with the cast off-camera described watching Carraro and his supposed rivals sharing dinner and laughing together like old friends. Carraro himself addressed the contradiction directly in one interview, explaining that the captains could joke around and share a beer on land, but the moment they hit the water, everything changed. That distinction, friendly off the clock, fiercely competitive on it, seems to capture the real dynamic among the Wicked Tuna cast far better than any single storyline the show ever aired. Whatever the mix of authenticity and television packaging, the results Carraro produced were undeniably real. He won the show's very first season in 2012. He won again in 2014, then in 2016, then in 2017, and once more in 2019, 5 championships across 8 seasons, a level of dominance no other captain on the show came close to matching. It's worth asking, though, how much of the confident, calculating character audiences saw was actually Carraro, and how much was the product of editing. According to reporting at the time, the captains were candid about the fact that Wicked Tuna operated like a reality show built around real personalities rather than a fully scripted drama. The situations were genuine, but producers still shaped footage into storylines designed to highlight rivalry and tension. Carraro's competitiveness clearly existed long before any camera crew arrived in Gloucester. What television did was frame that competitiveness into a character audiences loved to either root for or root against. Wicked Tuna was built around the idea that fishing could be turned into entertainment, rivalries, standings, dramatic catches. But underneath that format was a profession that carries genuine, sometimes fatal, risk. And over the years, that risk caught up with people connected to the show in heartbreaking ways. In the summer of 2018, tragedy struck the Wicked Tuna family when Nicholas Duffy Fudge died unexpectedly at just 28 years old. Fudge had worked as first mate aboard Tyler McLaughlin's Pinwheel and had appeared on the Outer Banks spin-off of the franchise. He'd grown up fishing alongside his father and grandfather, making the tragedy feel especially cruel, given how deeply fishing ran in his family. National Geographic and the show's production team confirmed his death publicly, but no official cause was ever released. That silence left room for speculation to spread online, with theories ranging from decompression sickness to unrelated legal troubles from his past. None of that speculation was ever substantiated by credible reporting. What multiple news outlets consistently reported was simply that his cause of death had not been made public. The show paid tribute to him with an on-screen moment of silence, and those who knew him remembered his fearless, adventurous spirit. 6 years later, the franchise lost another familiar face under devastating circumstances. Charlie Griffin, a captain who appeared on Wicked Tuna, Outer Banks, died in March of 2024 at the age of 65 following a boating accident near North Carolina's Outer Banks. He had been traveling from Virginia Beach toward Wanchese when the Coast Guard received a report that his vessel was overdue. Griffin and his dog were later found dead after the boat was located near Oregon Inlet. Importantly, both National Geographic and the show's production company were clear that this accident had no connection to the series itself. It happened well outside of filming, a reminder that these captains were living dangerous, demanding lives on the water long after the cameras stopped rolling for any given season. Then there's the story of Paul Hebert, which took a very different kind of turn. In 2016, Hebert pleaded guilty in federal court to Social Security and Medicaid fraud, after prosecutors determined he had made false statements about his ability to work while continuing to earn income as a commercial fisherman. He ultimately received 4 years of probation, a $5,000 fine, and was ordered to repay more than $53,000 in restitution. It's a stark contrast worth noting, because when it comes to Dave Carraro, there is no comparable legal trouble on record. No arrest, no fraud case, nothing resembling a documented scandal tied to his name. Whatever explanation exists for his disappearance from the show, it isn't buried in a courtroom. Interestingly, one of the more personal, human moments to emerge from Carraro's life away from the cameras wasn't about controversy at all. It was about loss of a different kind. His dog Pickles, a longtime companion who had been part of his life on and around the tuna.com for nearly 17 years, passed away in 2022. It's a small detail in the grand scheme of his story, but it offered one of the rare, unscripted glimpses into the life of a man who otherwise kept nearly everything about his personal world tightly guarded. For all the hours of footage Wicked Tuna produced featuring Dave Carraro, viewers learned remarkably little about who he actually was outside of the boat. He revealed where he fished, what he caught, and which rival he wanted to outdo that week, but the rest of his personal life stayed almost entirely out of frame, which makes one particular on-screen moment stand out as one of the biggest quiet revelations of his entire run on the show. In the very first episode of the show's 13th season, Carraro casually referred to his longtime partner, Jess Boardway, not as his girlfriend, but as his wife. He caught himself mid-sentence, correcting the slip with a laugh and admitting he needed to stop saying girlfriend out of habit, since he was in fact a newlywed. The wedding itself had apparently already taken place close to a year earlier, in May of 2023, in Gloucester. Carraro never turned it into a public announcement or a media moment. The clearest public confirmation actually came from a friend and fellow charter captain who attended the ceremony and later shared photos online, expressing how honored he was to have been there. What makes this even more interesting is that Carraro and Boardway's relationship wasn't some sudden development that appeared out of nowhere after the cameras stopped following him closely. Evidence of their relationship stretches back years to at least 2016, and along the way, the couple even welcomed a family dog together. Yet despite years of television exposure, Carraro's personal life remained almost impossible to piece together from public sources. There were occasional photos, scattered mentions, a rare interview aside here and there, but nothing close to the constant stream of personal detail that usually surrounds reality television stars. It's a strange contrast. Millions of people felt like they knew Dave Carraro intimately after watching him fish season after season, and yet almost nothing was actually known about the man once the boat engine shut off for the day. This is where the real mystery lives, not in some hidden scandal, but in an ending that was never fully explained. National Geographic officially wrapped Wicked Tuna after 13 seasons, with its final episode airing in late May of 2024, closing out a run of more than 200 episodes. The network statement was gracious but sparse, thanking the cast, the fans, and the Gloucester community for the show's long run, but offering no real explanation for why, after more than a decade of strong performance, the series was ending. And that's part of what makes the ending so strange. According to reporting from the Boston Globe following the cancellation, the show had been described by insiders as one of National Geographic's top performers for over a decade, both domestically and internationally. One of the other longtime captains pushed back directly against the idea that declining ratings were behind the decision, insisting that viewership hadn't collapsed at all. Yet according to the same reporting, none of the captains were given a clear reason for why the series was being canceled. Some pointed to broader corporate restructuring following National Geographic's integration into the Disney media umbrella, but no source ever confirmed that cost-cutting was actually the deciding factor. The official explanation, in the end, amounted to little more than a thank you note. Crucially, Carraro wasn't quietly phased out before that final season. He was right there until the very end, still aboard the Tuna.com, still competing hard against fellow former champions for the season title in what became a tense, back-and-forth battle all the way to the finale. He didn't win that final season. He came up short against a longtime competitor, but he was very much part of the show's closing chapter, not someone who had already been erased from it. When the series ended, it wasn't because Carraro had vanished from the story. It was because the story itself came to a close for everyone involved. So when you strip away the rumors, the speculation, and the dramatic framing that headlines love to use, what's actually left? A five-time champion who built his fishing career the hard way, long before television ever noticed him. A competitor whose on-screen rivalries were rooted in something real, even if the show packaged them for drama. A man who quietly got married without turning it into a spectacle, who mourned the loss of a dog that had been by his side for nearly 2 decades, and who was still out on the water competing hard in the very same episode that closed the book on his television career. There's no secret scandal here, no hidden downfall waiting to be uncovered. Dave Carraro didn't disappear. The show did. And when the cameras finally stopped rolling, he still had exactly what he'd always had before any network came calling: a boat, a crew, and the ocean waiting for him at Gloucester Harbor. That, in its own way, might be the most surprising ending of all. A Wicked Tuna star who simply kept living the life the show was built to capture, long after the show itself was gone. It's also worth stepping back and thinking about why stories like this generate so much speculation in the first place. Reality television has a way of making viewers feel like they formed a genuine relationship with the people on their screen. For 13 seasons, audiences watched Carraro check the weather, argue with rivals, haul in massive fish, and celebrate hard-won victories. That kind of sustained exposure creates a strange kind of intimacy, one where fans feel entitled to closure, to an explanation, to some kind of dramatic final chapter that ties everything together. When a show simply ends quietly and without spectacle, it can feel almost unsatisfying, like the story was cut off before its natural conclusion. That discomfort is often what drives people toward rumors in the first place. A quiet ending doesn't generate headlines the way a scandal does. So in the absence of a clear explanation, audiences tend to fill the silence with their own theories. It doesn't help that Carraro himself was never the type to court publicity outside of what the show required. He didn't build a large independent social media presence detailing his life between seasons. He didn't sit down for extensive tell-all interviews after the show ended. He simply went back to doing what he'd been doing since long before National Geographic ever picked up the concept for Wicked Tuna. Fishing hard, flying planes, and living a life that had never actually depended on television in the first place. For a lot of reality stars, the end of a show means the end of relevance, financial security, or public identity. For Carraro, the show was always something that had been layered on top of an already established career, rather than something that created his livelihood from scratch. That distinction matters enormously when you're trying to understand why his exit looked so different from other reality television departures that end in bitter public fallout or visible financial struggle. There's also a broader lesson buried in Carraro's story about how reality television shapes public perception of real people. The captains of Wicked Tuna were not actors reciting scripted lines. They were working fishermen whose genuine skills, rivalries, and personalities were filmed, edited, and packaged into a television-friendly format. That process doesn't necessarily create false narratives, but it does simplify complicated relationships into digestible storylines. Carraro and Hebert's friendship-turned-rivalry is a perfect example. On screen, it played as a mentor versus protege conflict, but the reality behind it involved genuine loyalty, personal support during a natural disaster, and a friendship that outlasted years of on-water competition. The same appears to be true of his rivalry with Tyler McLaughlin, which looked fierce in the edited footage, but reportedly dissolved into shared meals and laughter the moment the cameras stopped rolling. None of this means Wicked Tuna was somehow dishonest or manipulative in some sinister way. Reality television, by its nature, has always involved selecting and shaping footage to build compelling narratives out of real events. What it does mean is that viewers should be cautious about assuming they fully understand someone based on a heavily edited television persona, no matter how many seasons they've watched. Carraro's public image was built almost entirely around confidence, competitiveness, and a certain unbothered swagger about winning. But behind that persona was a man who quietly supported friends through hardship, kept his marriage private for nearly a year before it slipped out on camera, and mourned the loss of a 17-year-old dog with the same sincerity as anyone would. In the end, the most accurate way to describe what happened to Dave Carraro isn't disappearance, scandal, or downfall. It's simply continuation. The version of his life that existed before Wicked Tuna, hauling giant bluefin tuna out of the North Atlantic, flying planes, running a charter business out of Gloucester, never actually stopped. Television found him already living that life, documented over a decade of it, and then, for reasons the network never fully explained, decided to stop filming it. Carraro didn't need to reinvent himself or explain his absence, because from his perspective, there may not have been much of an absence to explain it all. The boat was still docked in Gloucester. The tuna were still running through the North Atlantic every season. And Dave Carraro, as far as any public record shows, was still right where he'd always been. Well, that's it for now. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this deep dive into Dave Carraro's real story, drop a like, leave a comment, and subscribe so you don't miss our next video. And don't skip the one waiting for you on screen right now. It's a story you won't want to miss.